Where'd Kathy go? Kathy, thanks so much for helping set this up. I'm Neil Abercrombie,
So this is
Vice
for the
President of
video.
Government Relations here at Utah State.
Do I use his mic?
And I was just telling
We're gonna
Grace
think
in
y'all
my
are probably
office, this
fine
feels
without
like
it.
the
Yeah.
first event we've ever done. So it's awesome to actually have a few people in person for an event, and I know we have a few that are logging in, I think through YouTube, and we have some other ways for people to interact remotely as well. But we're thrilled to have Congressman Moore here. Grace, do you mind making a quick announcement on the app before I introduce the Congressman? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think most of y'all should have it, but the crowd likes app. If you haven't scanned the QR code, you'll be able to message some questions or ask some questions on your seat. So you can scan those QR codes on the crowd likes app. Crowd likes.
We have not used it before, so.
Don't have it.
And you probably just yell out a question.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to repeat it for the audio.
Perfect. I will try to moderate, but I think with this forum, we really want it to be an open dialogue and discussion with the Congressman, and we really appreciate the questions that have been submitted in advance. I will say, just a real brief introduction to Congressman Blake Moore. We haven't had a chance to work together a lot, but we first met probably, I guess, almost a year ago. It was yeah, it was
First call right after the primary.
spring. Yeah, so we saw Blake Moore get through the convention, and we invited him to campus to sit down and meet with university leaders here. And I'll tell you, myself, President Cockett, our leadership team, were extremely impressed with that visit. Congressman Moore asked a lot of great questions about the university, about the academic portfolio, about our research. It's a very engaging discussion as a first meeting. I attribute some of that to your background in consulting at Cicero, where you worked immediately before this, where you worked with a number of different clients, private sector, public sector, and it was clear he had a vision for representing the First District and working closely with Utah State University within the First District. So we're thrilled to see him elected in November, and we were even more thrilled to see Congressman Moore's committee assignments, natural resources and armed services, which are both very critical issues to the First District, to Utah State with our research portfolio in land, water, and air, and of course the Space Dynamics Lab in Defense. So I know we'll have a chance to work very, very closely together in the future too. So I will stop with all the other accolades from Congressman Moore's bio, but you can read through it. You can read about how he was a decent quarterback in high school, and you can pepper him with whatever questions you have. So Congressman Moore, do you want to provide some introductory remarks before we turn it over to the first question right here on the front row?
I'll be very brief.
Questions that were provided. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
You're good? Okay, and then that'll work, so I won't have to use that too much. I was thrilled with the questions we got, so I actually want to jump right into it. But, you know, I was a freshman up here, and I got a chance to play redshirt 1998-99 season. And then when I was on my mission for my faith, I lost my scholarship. There was a coaching change and everything, so I got to go and live in central Utah and ended up graduating from the University of Utah. But getting a chance to run for office, and immediately, literally right after the convention, I was like the 12th person to enter the convention, and just worked really hard. We had I think we had a great message. It obviously resonated. And we were able to finish in the top 2 of that convention, so I got on the ballot. People had written that off like, oh, I didn't see you coming from, you don't have any political background or name recognition to any degree, except for the 5 people that I was friends with up here that remembered me from those days, because again, I was an average quarterback. But I loved my time up here, and it was something that I got to go and reflect on a lot during the campaign. Coming up and being somebody that the president of the university and Neil wanted to actually meet with, was started to be like, okay, there's a lot of gravity to this role, and that has continued to build. It's not an easy role. It's not the glamorous role you would expect it to be. It's tough, and with all that, I'm just more and more convinced that I can do some good here, and I'm looking forward to a potential of making that happen. My conservative brand and my conservative values are rooted in 3 principles that I like to communicate as much as possible, and I probably oversay it, but I'm going to do it again. And we've coined it API, we haven't actually branded or trademarked it yet, but that's what we talk about in our office: aspirational, pro-growth, and inclusive. And when you think about aspirational, just go over to the Space Dynamics Lab. Northern Utah is where the Transcontinental Railroad met. This is where we were instrumental in helping put a man on the moon, helping build a rover. And just, if you don't believe me, like, we think big in this district. And go over to the Space Dynamics Lab and embrace that concept of that's the next big frontier on making sure that we have the communications and the defense-related capabilities in space. That's the part about what I love about this district. It's thinking big. So my committee assignments, armed services and natural resources, are going to be somewhere where I have some insight and some influence to be able to hopefully shape policy and serve the constituents in the 1st District. When I talk about pro-growth, that's the most common term we all hear in Utah. You're going to hear about it a lot in your MBA programs and your policy-related courses. But when we talk pro-growth, it's just about providing balance and being thoughtful about how we address the inevitable growth. And I think the best way I ever had it communicated, I'm on natural resources, and the key thing is talking about how we're stewards of our environment and being thoughtful about how we promote good behavior and do it in a way that will be able to sustain growth and not limit us as well. That's a tough balance, especially in the world of politics where things get so sensationalized. It's tough to be able to be that reasonable voice and that pragmatic voice and to find that right balance. And I'm committed to learning more and taking input and finding ways to do that. I think Utah has the motivation and the leadership that does that as well. And then when I talk about inclusivity and being inclusive, it's about communicating the need for our next generation of Americans, our next generation of Utahns that want to be able to embrace a party mentality that can better communicate some of these things. I see so much of it with my colleagues and people that I interact with state leaders, and I want to be a voice in that type of that reasonable, inclusive nature. Anyway, so be thinking of that framework as more questions come up, and try to find examples in each one of those that I get excited about and go out to represent Utah. It's an easy place to represent. I can put in any topic that you can talk about: the economy, our COVID response, education, right? Utah does so many things right. And we in our within our own borders of Utah get rewarded for that with a strong economy. And then at the same time, we have the most philanthropic state that exists as well per capita, right? And a lot of that's because we have a lot of donations to the prominent church here. But volunteer hours, that's not just a 10% of your paycheck type of thing, right? We do a really good job at that. We want to talk about elections. Elections in Utah, we've grown the voter turnout, making them very inclusive, embracing mail-in balloting, embracing all these concepts, and doing it in a secure way. So I think one of the best honors that I had in this first quarter, and it's been a very tough entry, it's been a tough quarter into politics, was being able to introduce Ricky Hatch from Weber County Elections Office, the clerk into one of the committee rooms. He was brought in as an expert to talk about how Utah does inclusive and secure elections. Again, it's about balance. It's about finding that way to promote that. So I get labeled a pragmatist. I get labeled practical. I just came from a consulting world, and you all are getting trained in public, private, nonprofit sectors right now. That is where our world exists, and we have to have solution-oriented people that are willing to go back and do that. And I'm a freshman member of the minority party. I don't have a lot of influence back there yet, but I'm creating the right type of relationships on both sides of the aisle to find a good potential future that I have a lot of hope for. There's a lot of things that I'm worried about, but I continually make a message of optimism and hope, and I'm really excited about kind of addressing some of your questions. So let me pause there, and we'll jump into it. If I don't use my hands correctly, I'm usually sitting at a desk, so a little awkward there.
All right, Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you with the first question, but let me give you the mic so everybody can
Okay.
hear.
Thank you. So Representative Moore, I'd like to repeat the question that I asked at your town hall a few
Yep.
weeks ago. It's a little modified, but a little more updated. As a young Republican, I'm increasingly concerned by three issues involving the party. Number one, the grip that Trump has on the party, Trump and the GOP's contributions to the January 6th insurrection, and the continued lies regarding the election. Number 2, the use of fear and conspiracy theories rather than solutions and good policy ideas to win voters. Number 3, the lack of bipartisan compromises and legislative efforts from most Republicans who seem to care more about owning the libs and viral fame. Because of these issues, I am unsure of my place in the Republican Party. What advice do you have for people like me?
Great. And I think the answer that I gave you on the town hall was to, give me a chance. It was to that message of give me a chance. You're speaking a lot of concerns that a lot of people have. Too much of what our party is trying to accomplish gets lost in the message in the media and with respect to former President Trump. This is a delicate, tough thing to deal with, right? And let me just explain how I've approached this. Two main questions I got on the campaign trail. There's probably 3 or 4 that would bubble up. 2 big questions I would always get. 1, do you support President Trump? I entered the race about a week after Mitt Romney had impeached on that first impeachment trial, one of the two charges. So it was a big topic within the primary system, especially the convention. And the other question was, are you like Mitt Romney or are you like Mike Lee? And after trying to answer that like 1 or 2 times, I finally just got to the point where I would say, I'm like Blake Moore. I don't know what else to tell you. And I actually think that people respected that a lot. But with the President Trump question, it's a fundamental problem that I think in our government where, and this is going to be to both sides. And there was another question that was submitted that I'll try to maybe lump into it, is that, folks, if we respect the Constitution, we have to have clear separation of powers. And it's tough for members of Congress, especially in the House of Representatives, that they have to go run for election every 2 years. They have to raise money in order to be able to do it, and they have to be able to support a platform that exists. Okay? Let me be very clear. President Trump did things for the Republican Party that are very, very positive, right? There's a bit of a working class mentality that was brought back, and a lot of things are perception-wise, but sometimes the perception of the Republican Party was just that it was kind of the wealthy, maybe Wall Street type of mentality. Like there was a working class, middle class resurgence within the Republican Party, and a lot of that had to do with President Trump. I'm not saying he owns that, but a lot of that had to do. There's externalities that exist with a lot of our foreign policy. We do need to have a tough stance on China. We do need to find new opportunities for manufacturing in other parts of the globe that can help bring China back to the table. I can talk specifically about China. I have a lot of thoughts on this one. But in doing so, we also created those same types of relationships with Canada. And now we're really struggling with our timber prices, with trade and policy there. So there's always these externalities or side effects that take place. But we do need to take a tough stance with China. That is the potential global superpower struggle going forward. And we've never had an adversary. If you look back in time from Japan and Germany and Russia, we've never had an adversary where we have such a tight economic integration with that particular country. And so as they gain military prowess and we try to maintain this, and at the same time they own a lot of our debt, this is a tricky situation, and you can't just have rhetoric be the ones that controls it all. So on our relationship with Israel, there are many positive things that happened during the Trump administration. I do not support a lot of the election claims that took place. I did not object, and I voted to certify the election. And one of the key fundamental pieces, what I saw was this need to sort of like have some connection or loyalty when we see our Supreme Court, the judicial branch of our government, they have lifetime appointments, and they're not necessarily beholden to the executive branch in any way. Even though they were appointed by President Trump, they weren't necessarily beholden to it, right? And most of my colleagues, they went into that objection and that to make a point. There was no chance that any of it was ever going to they were never going to be able to overturn a state because we knew no Republicans or no Democrats were going to do it. They knew that all going into it. They wanted to highlight issues that took place. There was measures that took place during the pandemic where a governor was making a decision or a state legislature didn't have a chance to approve a change that was made in election law. There was all these things going on. And I still rest on the fundamental piece of we cannot just object to the 6 states where Trump lost. That's a problem. We have to go, and if we have to be willing to object to Texas or Ohio or North Carolina where some of these anomalies may have taken place as well, And if we just go in with just the 6 states where Trump lost, then we lose our credit. Then we lose the credible argument. Okay, so I made that point day 2. I thought that I was going to be packing my bags up and heading home the next day because I felt like really emboldened to make that point. Right? I did 6% better than President Trump in the 1st district. John Curtis did 8% better. He has a lot more of Salt Lake County, so he's going to do a little bit better there. Chris Stewart did 4% better. Across the country, over 82% of House Republicans beat Trump in their own district. I think somebody had told me 181 of us had beaten him. So this trend that happened in Utah also happened in those swing states. All right, so I'm a data guy, and I love to look at data trends. I've done a ton of polling. I worked for Dan Jones, with Dan Jones for several years. I took over some of the polling work when he left. So I tend to rely a lot on data trends. President Trump lost the suburban vote. That's all there is to it, right? And that predictor has gone back for decades to show who was the ultimate presidential candidate. It's just a tough thing. So there's this connection. We want to highlight elections integrity. That was the motivation for the vast majority of folks. But it gets perceived as just a loyalty to Trump, and you break down that barrier from Congress to the executive branch. And that's what our Constitution establishes, is 3 branches of government that need to be operating independently of each other. And it's a tough thing to exist with, and that's tough. So with respect to going forward, I think that there needs to be, and whoever can balance this is going to be successful in the Republican Party. And I'm looking out towards 2024 as a potential presidential candidate, somebody that can balance, maintaining the awesome things that came with our party, that did come, and the positivity that came with respect to Trump, but being able to embrace those that are really frustrated with President Trump, because it will just be now, we can't let it be a party that becomes siloed. And being able to lift all tides, I think you could go in and have the right type of policy going forward. So I obviously have a lot of thoughts, and I tend to ramble when that's particularly with this subject comes up, and I think it touched on another couple questions, so I'm okay using the time. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Great question, Aaron. Grace, I'm gonna look to you. If you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll go to that, or if someone has a question. But I have a list of like a dozen and a few other things. So, Congressman Moore, we'll stick with kind of with this theme. And 3 months on the job now, formally. I'll ask you a question just to reflect a little bit on that for us. What have you been encouraged by since you've been back in Washington in this new role? What have you been discouraged by looking back at the last few months?
Excellent. That's an easy question. A lot of your business students, we think in quarters. It's a rough quarter. We're going to have a better second quarter. I'm kind of like speaking to my sales team here on how we go about doing it. I am really hopeful about, what can come. For me, our office in particular, we're doing, and let me quickly introduce who I have with me, but we're doing an awesome job on passport issues and Social Security questions and those things that really do matter in a congressional office. So we have Sherry Pippin, and she's detailed over Cache and Box Elder counties, a caseworker with us, and then Peter Jenks, he's our district director, and so they're in the Ogden office and covering all those types of items. So that's been a really fun part, is to be able to make sure that our team is up and running. I've loved our legislative team back in Washington, D.C., and I've spent most of my time there because we've been in D.C. a lot more than we expected during this first quarter, and having that team gel. And then the district team is just on day one, we're up and running on casework and handling all those things that you'll never hear about in the press, that nobody ever tweets about, but we're doing that type of stuff. So those are kind of the things that I'm really encouraged about, is our team effort and working on that. Obviously discouraged at the way things started January 6th. I came in really excited. Early November. We won a lot of House Republican seats. I look at that as, okay, so there's there's concern among Americans that if we get too extreme, and there was a strong left-leaning liberal extreme push when you have Representative Ocasio-Cortez and the squad, and I don't get involved in a lot of this rhetoric stuff and a lot of the back and forth, but there was sort of that was apparent to a lot of Americans, and they said, well, I don't know, a lot of House Republicans won, and I believe it was because America was saying like, well, whether or not I vote for President Trump, I want to support a Republican in the House, because I believe that some of those policies are the right thing for our economy and for our potential progress. Losing the Senate was really tough. And this is why that should have been handled the night of November 3rd. Senator Perdue in Georgia, he won with 49.7% of the vote, I believe. You can fact check me on that. I think you needed to get to 50%. Any state that is going to require a 50% threshold, Utah doesn't, Maine does, but the way Maine handles it is they use ranked choice voting to get to that threshold and to get. People are voting leading up to November 3rd. If you add in another 2 months, all sorts of crazy things can happen. And we ended up losing the Senate. And so what I was excited about coming into was a narrow margin in the House, a slight majority of Republican in the Senate, and then with President Biden in there, there's really not much you can do. And you all here in our local economies, working, kind of building up our education systems, doing the real work, can be left to not have to have too much of a opportunistic legislation. What we've seen in this first quarter is a very, very opportunistic legislation with even though the margins are so narrow, just because you have a Democrat in the White House and a Democrat-controlled Senate just by one person and a Democrat-controlled House by like 6, you're seeing a lot of legislation get pushed through, right? And so you've seen that over this first quarter. The limited amount of bipartisan effort going into a lot of stuff right now is probably the most discouraging thing. I have joined the Bipartisan Working Group, Problem Solvers Caucus, Republican Mainstream, and Republican Governance Group. They're all practical-minded. Let's go. We're gonna stand our ground on very key conservative principles. But with bridges and roads, we can work together, folks. What in the world is going on? So I feel like I'm at least trying to do my part in that, and it's tough, and sometimes you don't get a lot of the work done.
Thanks. Let me look. Anybody have a question they want to ask, or am I okay going with another one?
Go ahead.
So there's just so much going on in the world. I've always wondered, how do you aggregate all this information? How do you keep up on all the news? Do you watch Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity? Are you watching CNN or Fox News all day? Or have news briefings? How does that process work?
So every morning I wake up and there's one email in my inbox. It's from the Flip Side, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it. It's a great daily email. I'm seeing a thumbs up. That's cool because I think it's being used. I don't know. Flip Side, you can sign up for it. You get one email every morning with a topic, and it's a topic that's it tells you what the right is saying and it tells you what the left is saying. I wish we didn't have to just look at both sides and try to critically think about how you go about doing it, but that's my approach. And so I then just have to take a look and see where things are going. I have left meetings, and then I've gone on to CNN, and I'm like, nope, that's not right. That is not what is going on here. And I've also left, and I said, I'm really proud of CNN for calling that out. They get a hard time for being just mainstream media and left. No, they're being thoughtful there. I have that luxury because I'm in some of these situations. But yeah, we have a divided media, almost clearly. I would encourage you to embrace the concept of both sides, and then just rely on your own critical thinking skills to look through and find trust sources. Personally, I also, and in the Flip Side, there's usually a snippet from Wall Street Journal, their editorial board. I have I read that. I like the Wall Street Journal editorial board. I think it's reasonable in its approach, and we'll try to do that. But what I like about that Flip Side is that it takes snippets from multiple different types of publications and sort of says, here's what this is saying, here's what this is saying, here's the facts, and they're very factual about the first part of the email. It's like, this is what's going on, here's what you're saying about it. And you just dig in and try to understand where it's going from. So, and then I have my committee work and all that, where you're getting, real information. If it's not grandstanding, there is good, information that's shared with the committee to talk about what policy-related items are coming up. You rely on your team a lot. You have a good legislative team to dig through what type of legislation is going. That's probably more the difficult thing, is determine well, should we co-sponsor this or not? Or I like that person, but is this something we care enough about to put our name associated with it? Those are kind of tough decisions, and they're usually you have until 6 p.m. today, and it's 2 p.m. and you just heard about it. And it's something you might want to support, but to vet it and everything, it's kind of tough. So, because every policy decision has an externality, it has another side effect that you can't always control.
Great question. I'm going to ask a question, Congressman Moore, that is not on your list.
Yep.
So hope that's okay. But it's something I know you've thought a lot about already. But the thing you mentioned around inclusion, every 10 years after the census, every state goes through a redistricting process.
Yep.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as Utah's entering into redistricting over the next year or so. What are some things that you think the state should be looking at to make sure it is inclusive to all voters, that they feel like their vote matters?
Well, I stood up on Utah State, about 3 years ago. It was a similar forum like this. I'm sure you all heard about it. It's probably big news. I'm probably lauded as this it was the best lecture that had ever been given at Utah State. No, Ross Peterson is a good friend of mine, and he was helpful in getting that to do. I co-chaired Proposition 4. Proposition 4 was to establish an independent redistricting commission in Utah. Right. So let me be very brief with all this, because I could go on, and I usually do drone on about this. The H.R. 1, the election law that was just passed in the House, has one part of it would establish independent redistricting commissions across the country. And so how could I be someone that was co-chair of Prop 4 and then vote against H.R. 1? This is the fundamental problem with our government right now, is that we are not letting states come to these conclusions on their own. There is too much that is being done at the central level that basically wipes out the concept of federalism. All right, and of course, H.R. 1, the redistricting piece, that didn't actually get a lot of pushback. There was several other measures that involve with how taxpayer money is being used to plus up contribution dollars. I will say it over and over again. I will say it on record right now. Requiring an ID is not voter suppression, and I will not let that become a thing. It's for anything I can control. And again, I go back to what Utah is doing with elections. You have seen a ton of voter turnout get really, really high. People are engaged in the process to the levels we've never seen, but we still run very safe and secure elections. Find that balance, and that's important for other states. And so a lot of what H.R. 1 does, it federalizes that. And what I loved about my experience is that we made a Utah solution. And there was 19 other states that had done it at that point. They've come up with their own solutions. My goal in redistricting commission is saying, hey, look, let's embrace it. We didn't do a binding commission. We're not going to tell the state legislature. It's per the Constitution that they have the authority to do that. Let's allow for a group to come in and see what we can do. I love the concept of communities of interest. And I'm probably going to go to some of these open hearings that they're going to have and talk about, hey, look, I am a member, I can represent the defense community. Let's make sure to keep some of our defense-related assets, Hill Air Force Base, Space Dynamics Lab, all these types of things. And I want to be someone that can go and serve that. I'm positioned to do that. Consider a map that might lump some of this type of stuff together. This is just one of those things. I have an op-ed out about it that I wrote several years ago. It's something to embrace. I think that I would love it if all states would embrace it. And if Utah, a red state, mostly conservative state, is willing to embrace it, then what's going to hold back a more liberal blue state from doing it? They won't have any leg to stand on if other states are jumping on board with it. So I'm hoping over the next decade that we can get a lot of momentum and people can see the value in it. But also, at the same time, not mandate it and control it at the central level. Let me take a question. I'm going to say one from here. We talked briefly about it, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's the velvet rope economy, embracing capitalism, but also understanding that there is other needs in our society. Income wage is a big issue. We need to be able to address that. You saw with the 2017 the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that we were able to grow the economy. Before I draw on any more, in order to fix our budget and deficit, or our debt and deficit issues, I think there's a framework that you need to use. One, grow the economy. I think we did that in 2017. Paul Ryan personally told me, he said, my biggest regret was not being able to address, after we were able to get corporate tax rates at a globally competitive level, we were not able to go and address entitlement. We lost the majority in the House, and we didn't have any way to go through entitlement reform, because we have a spending problem. We have a big spending problem in our country, and You can get entitlement reform done. That can address some of the spending. Doing that, then you can go to some of your discretionary spending and take a look at where can we find opportunities of scale and ways to get our spending there under control. And at that point, then we consider revenue increases, right? To increase revenues before you get your spending under control is only putting good money after bad, right? And a lot of MBA folks will understand that investment philosophy. You know, it's just going to go into a black hole. So I'm passionate about it. I want to look back 10 years from now and say that I had some impact on getting us to a better debt to GDP ratio. In 1997, we did it. We did it in a bipartisan way. Newt Gingrich, John Kasich were on the House side. Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and Leon Panetta. Go research it. Go look it up. There was collaboration that was done. You could read the autobiographies of both Leon Panetta and John Kasich, and kind of they talk a lot about how they did it. I'm hopeful because it was within our lifetimes, but we have an enormous amount of interest that we're paying on this debt that's going to make it much, much more difficult than it was in 97. So as a sidebar, that's a big thing that I always like to try to communicate. But this concept, my last 4 years at Cicero Group, I worked in social impact. And if there is a way to balance making sure that our corporations are being good, thoughtful community partners, there's this growing appetite for companies that are called B Corps, right? You have an awesome one here. And I'm not trying to promote businesses. You have several awesome ones in Utah, Cotopaxi, Maloof, these types of companies. They're being thoughtful about how they address sustainability, how they bring in the millennial workforce right now is demanding this. And you know who else is demanding it? To have a social mission tied to your business model, not just make some profits and then donate so it helps my taxes, but to make a social mission an actual part of your fundamental business operation. Well, BlackRock is involved. BlackRock is invested in this. Peterson Partners, Sorensen, all of these big investment players that are the beacons of capitalism, if you will, they are saying we want socially minded companies involved. And you're getting CEOs that are saying, I want to make sure that I have a strong workforce, and we're going to address the income wealth gap maybe at our own company level. And I hate to say it, but that's the answer. Because you can't mandate this kind of stuff. And you cannot limit your private sector with heavy taxation to try to go fix this, because it will get stuck in a bureaucratic environment in Washington, D.C., and you will get growth in our regulatory agencies. And I'm never one that says we don't need to regulate, right? I saw what happened in 2009, and I was frustrated, and as I embraced some of the things with Dodd-Frank, I thought, okay, we can't have banks having this type of leverage, and they can't be over-leveraged to this point because, you know, a lot of bad things can ultimately happen. Right now, I'm concerned about forbearance coming due in June or so, where people are going to have taken almost a year off paying their mortgages. How are they going to be able to get back to it? Are they going to be able to get back to it quick enough for their banks to then say, you know what, we should probably short sale this property. That's going to cause a little bit of a housing issue. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm saying like we have to be thoughtful about that. If we have companies focused on, you know, the what millennial workforce is pushing, then I think we can address some of these. You know, how do we address, you know, maintain capitalism, but also, you know, be thoughtful and smart and make sure that we have a community mind in place. So that's something that I care a lot about. If I had my wish, I would be able to make that a big summit that we did every year, every cycle that I'm in office, just to bring a lot of attention to a lot of the work that companies here in Utah are doing, and they're doing a great job with it. So,
Thanks. Any hands? Congressman, I have a question for you. It's a conversation we've had a little bit with President Cockett, and it's also maybe picking up on some of your background in consulting at Cicero, but give us some thoughts. As one of the conversations we're having a lot here on campus right now is, what is campus going to look like fall semester? You know, we're trying to restart back, hopefully some post-COVID normalcy. We know a lot of things are never going to go back to what it was. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, with both the new arena that you're in with Congress and what that might look like as you engage with people and constituents in Washington, D.C. in a new format, kind of a hybrid in-person Zoom world.
A hybrid's the answer. Hybrid is the point to focus on, because where does the pendulum shift in hybrid? Right now, I'm actually missing a committee hearing. I can join it online. I'm in Utah at a sanctioned committee hearing, gavelled in, going to ask my questions on this, and I can be doing 17 other things. This has been one of the most productive weeks in my time in Congress. We've got an awesome plan this week for our Box Elder on Monday. Had a bunch of committee hearings that I was able to take part in. Wednesday we were at Hill Air Force Base. Tuesday we were up in Ogden, or Thursday we were Ogden. We were here today. Like, we have to embrace this hybrid mentality, but can't lose our community. And so it's great that I can join this committee hearing, but I can tell you right now, it's only making us more partisan. So with respect to Washington, we have to err on the side of being together somehow, because that's what I think that we need to be doing to serve our constituents, is to quit bickering as much as we are and actually legislate. There was a question in there, is how do you get Congress to legislate instead of just with the media-fueled rhetoric? Maybe we take Twitter completely away from every member of Congress. Rob Bishop would have loved that. He was the first, as he retired, one of the things he said was, only member of Congress to never send a tweet. And like, that's going to actually go down in Cooperstown, in my opinion, at some point. We are trying to use it as a way to show what we're doing, where we're doing it, draw attention to things. You have to be able to be good stewards, and but it's just not productive. What we're seeing going on, it's just not productive, and that's not what you voted me there to do. And so I'm sincere about that. One of my favorite projects that I did in consulting was with a nursing school that was trying to ramp up its online education. Well, it missed the big hockey stick of nursing school online, right? Because there was tons of schools that got in. They were able to make it very profitable. They had a great experience. They served a ton of students. This company was a little bit behind, but they still wanted to do it. So they asked us to come in and assess it for them. And I'll hit the high point. We assessed it. It wasn't going to be very profitable. It was going to be very tough for them to get to that point and to grow to grow this in a way that would be feasible for them to justify the cost. 6 months later, I went down, I took the client to lunch, and he said, I am so glad you were real with us and you told us what the real issue was and how, and set the outlook. Not only because it gave my management, my leadership team a taste of reality of stuff that I was seeing, but it also helped us think about a new strategy. And the strategy now for their online program is to supplement their ground campus. And so I would strongly encourage, keep the community, get sports back going again. Do as much as you can with in-person classes and activities, but use it. You've built up this really great tool. You're going to need it to be competitive, and leverage the online capability that we need to do. Those are where so many of our new jobs are anyway. And embracing technology, don't suppress it, but maintain the community. I worry about our communities in general. The last time you went to a mall, right? That's where we got things done when we were kids, right? That's where we made things happen. That's where you met somebody that you had a crush on. I've talked to developers, and they say everything's in Amazon fulfillment centers, and they're going on the outskirts of town, and it's delivery to your home, everything. I'm not going to squash that. You embrace it, but we're not building centers for people to go and be humans together. Is that why we're becoming a more divided society, a more partisan society? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to blame it all on our retail capabilities, but it is something where if we live entirely online lives, there will be some bad side effects.
Yeah, Kathy, do you want the microphone, Kathy, or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
In the past, they've added to bills, they've called them sweeteners. I mean, they're basically earmarks, right?
Yeah.
And that was outlawed in 2011. But it is now coming back as community project funding.
Yeah, so it's not earmarks.
Yeah. Same as, though.
Yeah.
What is your opinion? What do you think about this?
Yeah, the Republican Party's in a really tough spot in this one because they're coming back regardless. And so ultimately, funding capabilities are an Article 1 responsibility. Congress needs to be able to address that. Ceding too much of that power to the executive branch is not good for Utah State, right? It is not good for anybody that would ultimately be in the minority. So the part that I'm encouraged about it is that that there is, from some of the stories I've heard or things that have taken place, there's added transparency. Things are going on the website. You're given a finite number of things that you can submit for, and the accountability and transparency is supposed to be heightened to a great degree. And actual leadership in both the House of Democrat and Republican leadership, I've seen them communicate that, and they're sincere about that, and I'm hopeful that that be the case. If you can have that, then you can ultimately, I think that this system can exist. From what I understand, it's 1% of the budget, so it's not an enormously huge piece. Still, majority of everything that's being appropriated or authorized and appropriated, those are the two sides of how things get processed through the budgeting system. Well, it's much more convoluted than that, but it's a very, very small percentage of what will be done in this new community-directed funding project. I actually still don't have the name down yet, but I'm hopeful that accountability and transparency can fix the issues that were there, because the alternative is to just let the executive branch have too much control in where things get funded, and then it's who's been in Congress the longest, who has that ultimate. I will then have the same options to go and approach things with First District as a 20-year member of Congress. And I think that's good. And I'm hopeful for it. So that's the reality. That's the majority of the conversation. Folks that are against it, they're doing it for right, good, principled reasons. But there's really not a solution because it's coming back regardless. And so our party was kind of put in a tough spot. I think Democrats, because they know it's coming back, are just going to support the concept. Our party has seen a lot of strife or turmoil, and it's good turmoil, and it created a lot of good discussions.
Kathy, great question. I was going to add mutual friends with Congressman Moore and myself, a guy named Michael Kennedy, who was my predecessor in my role. I started at Utah State University in 2011, that first Congress where it was banned. My office on campus was filled with binders of earmarks that the university had received from Senator Bennett's leadership. It was almost like haunting me that we couldn't go forward with any of those requests. And one of the guardrails now is only public entities will be able to benefit from these community project funding options. So it's going to be really interesting for public universities, especially moving forward with this new parameter. We'll work closely with our delegation on that, but it's definitely a great question. I saw one other hand over here. Yeah.
Shifting to global and international issues.
Yeah.
Thinking about Myanmar, thinking about the Uyghurs in China and Nigeria. What do you see playing out there, and the United States' role in pressure and human rights violations, those kind of things? Where do you see that going, and what can be done on those issues?
We're 30 trillion. So the question for anybody on, what do we see with issues of global issues? So I'm just going to repeat that real quick. With Uyghurs, with Burma, human rights violations that are apparent and obvious throughout the world. How do we address those? How much time? The issue, we have $30 trillion of debt. What kind of leverage can we put on people? China owns a chunk of our debt. What kind of pressure can we put on them? When we say that our national debt is a national security risk, that's another area that it means we have countries with sovereign wealth funds that they're in the black plenty, and they can go and subsidize industries until they box out other countries and do it in a way that is not financially feasible, but because they have such more financial strength, they can subsidize to a level and then block out the competition and then build their own ability to go and own that particular area. So debt probably wasn't what you expected me to say, but if we want to have influence, we have to remain as the country that our U.S. dollar has to be the reserve status. That's under threat as we continue to have more and more budget issues and the ability for us to go and impact the world. If the dollar no longer becomes, and maybe it goes into crypto. I mean, I'm not going to get into conspiracies here, but if the U.S. dollar is no longer the currency that's backed by the world and what we trade off of, does China take over? Does the renminbi? Is that what happens? Who's going to be able to well, hey, we're not going to come. We're not going to bring a lot of business to your Olympics. That's going to be like a prick in the arm. It's not going to be able to actually have real power. I still believe that American principles of addressing those human rights issues is the way to go, but we don't have the power to be able to do it sometimes. And we oftentimes see countries that we put sanctions on, and they're like, well, the U.S. is putting sanctions now, but we're going to go to some other players. And they'll look to China. And then it gets worse and worse if we don't have that ability to exercise that influence. So that, and we're not seeing a regulatory body that can address some of the major issues that we're seeing at the international scale. We can put together a government agency that can address patents within our own borders. But how do we deal with intellectual property threat from China? Well, we can wave our hands and be frustrated about it and maybe try to boycott some things. But until we have some type of international coalition that can address some of these issues, you see it with war crimes, and I think we've had some moderate success with it, but not to the scale that we need to. 5G is going to be one of those issues. What type of influence can Huawei have over our our TCOM systems? We need this type of interaction as a globalized society that we've become. We've taken a break from that for a year by not even really traveling internationally. Can we establish some type of organization that can do it? And I don't think the UN's capable of doing it. It's too political. You get veto power that makes it impossible to move forward on some of these issues. So I'm ultimately, I try to be solution oriented, and I'm bringing only extra problems to it because it's something that concerns me as well. But I think if we can be the superpower that I know we can be, it's going to be tough with that debt, though. It's going to continue to hamper us.
Natural Resources Committee, it just seems like such a polarized issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the kind of opportunities you've seen from Utah, and then of course all these challenges that go along with national parks, national monuments, public land access, things of that nature?
So I don't have the numbers with me, and again, please fact check me and reach out to our team. But we've seen, an ability to reduce our carbon emissions. Industry has a lot of these answers, and if we continue to encourage and push for that, then we don't have to make this such a one or the other. Best way a simple line that I've used before is this: the answer is not in one industry or one special interest. It has to be about that balance. And that's what I'm trying to, I know there's a big appetite on the Natural Resources Committee to help find that balance. It's tough with executive action that President Biden took, and he's reversing a lot of stuff that President Trump took. So again, let's be very clear, that's Congress's job. And if Congress can't work together, we're forcing presidents to do this. So I don't actually blame the executive branch. I still look at Congress and I want us to work together to get to the point where we can solve an immigration issue, or we can address DACA in a reasonable way and look at border security measures, right? Since I'm here, I'll also say I was sitting right behind on a flight back to DC. I was sitting behind a representative from SDL, and he was telling me that he was going back to Homeland to talk about some technological advances that we wanted to use at the border for some border security. I was beaming with pride that was my district that was going to actually, be thoughtful about that. So, we invested heavily in Tier 3. We've encouraged industry to put up their own money to stay out ahead of some of these regulations, to go into Tier 3 gasoline and making sure the refineries are able to do that. And that's having a positive impact, right? And so we have to have the answer within industry, maintain balance, to just be able to put moratoriums on our public lands. It's really tough for Utah. In New Jersey, they don't have to deal with that. States out in the eastern United States, they don't even know what a public land is, right? They have no concept of what a PILT payment is. And so that's also another issue that I really try to represent and fight for and say, look, let's be reasonable. We have people, good stewards, and yes, they're grazing on our land, but grazing is helping this, and this. I joined the bipartisan wildfire caucus with Joe Neguse and John Curtis kind of heading it up. There's reasonable solutions to be able to make sure that gets taken into consideration. But again, we're in a sensationalized world where it's climate change or it's drill, baby, drill. And it's really not what people want. And it's just being able to kind of come together. And unfortunately, as I think about it more and more, Your constituents want one thing, you have to go represent that, and that just becomes a bunch of different silos where we get into some sensationalism, but it's truly not what industry wants. Y'all are solving these problems while us back in Washington just kind of bicker in a lot of ways. So, right here.
Kind of almost in a combination of both of those questions. Do you see moving to more renewable and in a way green energy sources as being a way to crack down on human rights violations in the Middle East, and then also move away from the I just forgot his name. President before Reagan. After
Carter.
The Carter Doctrine.
So, question is, the fundamental question is can we invest in green technology, and can that be used as a way to solve some of the human rights violations? Give me a white paper on it, and I'll go introduce it next week. The way that it could be good is that if the U.S. doesn't miss out on opportunities for those key investments to take place in clean technology and finding solutions for environment, climate issues, right? If we can be in the forefront of that, and that's not done by mandated timelines that are untenable. They're not feasible by fix this by 2030, fix this by 2035. If you give our industry and our investment opportunities a chance, I'm confident that what we've seen happen in the past continue to work well. And if we can lead out on this, if we can make these renewables things cheaper and more economically feasible, we're not putting this on the backs of the middle classes, which is what will happen with going a full 180 on environment or on energy issues that we've seen from this moratorium going on right now. And again, I hope this is just a time to be thoughtful and then come back to some normalcy. I'm not encouraged there yet, though I haven't seen enough to communicate that. But if we can make those investments over a feasible timeline, then America can lead out. If America's leading out, America can set the standard and influence human rights violations. So that's the way I see it playing out. Again, it's going to be tough to get there, but that's how I see those two interacting with each other. So, and I'm not sure on the details on the Carter Doctrine. I was born in 1980. I'm a Reagan baby, so you can't hold me to anything that happened before not Ronald Reagan.
I want to make sure we're sensitive to your time, and you need to log into a committee hearing too, but I want to try to wrap up in a few minutes. I have one question, it's a real easy question, but you mentioned a couple of individuals that a lot of us know well, and Ross Peterson, Dan Jones. I would love to hear your thoughts, just reflecting a little bit on maybe some mentors that you've had that either inspired your run for Congress or inspired your pragmatic, solution-driven approach to politics, and maybe some advice to some of the students who are in a position in their own lives where they're seeking out mentors or some guidance and start to launch in their own careers.
Well, every one of the mentors that I can immediately start thinking about, they've all interacted with me over the last year. So as you're mentoring folks, or if you're willing to, you're finding mentors yourself, just think about, would this person be there for me when you're doing one of the most unique, challenging things that person has ever done? Running for office was a big leap. I got a young family. I was 39 years old in the middle of my career, and I just felt really confident that I wanted I have this background in diplomacy and intelligence, and then a problem-solving sort of. Felt like I really, even though it's not typical, because I'm not, I wasn't a mayor or I wasn't involved in anything in a political office before. I really felt confident and driven that I had something unique to offer. So I went for it. And every one of those mentors came up. An old coach, Coach Arslanian, he would actually give me pep talks. He's like, hey, it's the end of the last couple weeks of the primary. You're in the fourth quarter. I'm like, well, it's a little cheesy, but I kind of needed to hear it, actually. The founder of my previous firm was the person that I went to, right? And I said, I think I should be doing this. What do you think? And he said, is it a matter of if or when? And I said, well, I think Jane and I have sort of decided that it's a matter of when. He goes, if it's a matter of when, then you've got to go now, and I'll be your first contribution. So it's people like that are willing to be there for you, and don't ever worry about just narrowing it to one or two. Dan Jones walked in one day before he got sick, and I honestly think it was the last thing that he said to me. I think about it harder. Maybe it was a few more months or something, but He walked in and he's 84 years old. He's got a really gruffy voice, dressed to the nines every single day. And he just looked at me. He said, "Blake, don't wait too long to run." And I was thinking, if I ever wanted to run, it would be 15 years from now. But that stuck with me. And so interact with people, find people that are positive, that are willing to just care about your life. Those will be the mentors. You can go pick the smartest business person you know, but if they're not someone that's going to care about you individually, they're not going to be the best mentor to you. And they're going to be somebody that you feel comfortable going to with advice. Or like, I've got a big decision to make. Can I get your perspective? And those are the types of mentors you should find.
Well, with that, it's a good point to wrap up. Aaron, thanks. We'll give you a lot of credit for being inspiration for today's town hall forum with Congressman Moore. Grace, thanks for your help. Peter, Sherry, great staff that also help us out. So please join me in thanking Congressman Moore. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks, Neil. I appreciate it. So thanks for taking some time out.